Words for you. Heightened after a personal breakdown in 2021, Mara addressed the unmet need for honest discussion around witch girl problems. Her focus is clear, guiding individuals to mend their relationship with money, blending mindset and positive psychology to generate meaningful, holistic life changes. Marin made it her life mission to help as many people as possible approach thoughtful reflection with actionable practice around money, thereby delivering real results, including reduced stress, increased joy, and financial prosperity. We could all use that. So welcome. And she has a few books here that will be available after.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, and some of you may have read the first part of that bio as I was introduced to online. So I also have a master's degree in positive psych, and I'm triple certified, not only as a budget coach, but as a life coach and a yoga instructor. So all of that interweaves to the conversation I'm excited to host for us all here today, and specifically to launch off your topic for April. So April's topic is dropping the personas. And this topic is so aligned with one of my absolute favorite practices as a coach and as a speaker. And you'll be hearing all about that today, but I also highly encourage everyone, as you hear my words, to really let it filter through your own mind and what you need today. So take what serves you, leave the rest, as we talk about dropping the personas. And as a little bit of a heads up, I've kind of broken today into two main parts. The first is really talking about what is this concept of persona. And the second will have a little bit more hands-on practices for you to do some reflection, discover some personas within yourself, of course drop some personas potentially, and then even adopt some as we step forward for the rest of today. So personas. Personas in my work, I often refer to this topic as caricatures or characters within ourselves. In more traditional therapy practices, often this is referred to as parts work. So it's quite a common exploration and lens through which that we can reflect on ourselves as humans and how we navigate the world. And I introduced that here at the beginning to normalize what can sometimes feel a little wild, that we have all of these different voices and perspectives and even masks that we put on, and just normalize the fact that we all have them, and we likely all have multiple. Some that you may already be familiar with or that you've maybe heard a few times is your child self, your inner child, or your inner parent, parenting these different parts of yourself. With my work with clients, I often create these or help them bring to light these different personas or caricatures in alignment with their values and interests as well. So what that looks like is if I'm having a conversation with someone, and as introduced, I'm a financial coach, so often it's through the lens of money. We'll explore that a little bit today. But if I'm looking at someone's financial flow, they're having some feelings about money, as we all do, and they're saying, wow, this line item in my cash flow, I promise this links back to persona, is feeling like it's a lot. Let's say mortgage, for instance. That's one that's on our mind. And then we get into talking the deeper underskirts of what are we actually talking about here? Why is this even a part of your budget, your resources, how you spend your time and allocate your energy? And then we get to knowing for this specific individual in front of me, well, I love hosting. And so it was really a priority for me to find a place where I could bring my family together and really lead connection and community within myself and my family and my space. And so we find this persona that they have through the lens of a value that they carry, that is community and hosting and togetherness. So that's one example of, yes, there's child personas, we'll explore a few today, but also thinking of creating or thinking of ourselves through the lens of personas in relation to our values and our interests as well. I'm gonna introduce, we'll see how you guys love or may not love this, because I know when I was first introduced to it, I felt some resistance at first. A riddle to understand how influential personas can be in our lives. So I'm gonna introduce the riddle as a little heads up. I'm gonna wait a little bit before I give you the solution to the riddle. When I was first introduced to it, I had to wait days to hear the solution. I won't make you wait days. So here's the riddle. There's a goose, lovely goose, inside of a gooseneck bottle. So I always picture a wine bottle, but any bottle that gets narrower at the top. And this goose is nice and comfy, filling up the whole base of this gooseneck bottle. The riddle is, how do we get the goose out of the bottle without breaking the bottle or hurting the goose? Nice, big, comfy goose in the base of this gooseneck bottle. Gets narrow at the top. How do we get that goose out of the bottle without breaking the bottle or hurting the goose? Think about it for a little bit. And we'll come back to that answer in a little bit, and again, tie it back to personas. As you're thinking through this and how powerful personas can be, I want to talk about the why, at least with my background in psychology, of why I think we have these personas, why it's so common for us to think about ourselves and reflect through the world with this lens of parts work or persona work or character work. At the simplest form, I think of it as a survival mechanism. And with psychology, oftentimes people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What are those base things that we need to survive? And when I bring this up, oftentimes, at least for my mind, for a lot of my clients, we think of, well, shelter or food. These are these things that we need to survive, and often what we imagine at the base of this hierarchy. But what's also at the base of this hierarchy, and also needed for our survival, is something like belonging and community. We are relational beings. And so when we think about getting or helping ourselves to survive in this world, to thrive in this world, we do anything possible to make this happen, to have the shelter, to have the resources, to have the community, the belonging. And that's where personas can come in as a means of survival. Brené Brown talks a lot about belonging and how powerful that is. And maybe you've explored this yourself and how that influences or plays into your own life and your choices. An example of this, I'll use a personal story, is my persona of Miss Independent, being a highly independent person. And when I look back at why that was created, again, the why for personas, I think to my upbringing, which was great on the whole, but I also recognize that my parents had their own things that even as a child I was picking up on. My brother had his own stuff, them as a three-way figuring each other out had their own thing, and so I learned and adopted this persona of Miss Independent because I thought, well, if they have their own stuff going on, if I get straight A's and figure my own stuff out and I'll find my own niche of dance and kind of thrive there, and eventually this grows and grows and grows. Start my own business. I don't even need an employer. Like I'll just figure it out all on my own. That's a persona that I took on as a means to survive, to belong, and to find my way to get what I need. Again, that base of Maslow's hierarchy. We all have this in different ways. So as I'm sharing my story, maybe this makes you think of how you have showed up and influenced yourself, either consciously or subconsciously, to thrive or survive in this world. Now, when I talk about personas, and even with the theme of April dropping personas, I love to guide these conversations as much as possible through a lens of curiosity and being free of judgment. So although maybe we could look at that Miss Independent and say, well, it helped you start a business, like you're doing pretty well for yourself, you have this autonomy in your life, that's good. But it also leads to some outcomes that are interesting, to use the Minnesotan term. Because that Miss Independent, in hindsight, I see that that's also what led me to certain decisions in life, such as pursuing a relationship, almost getting married to someone who I knew all along there was something that wasn't quite aligning. I just couldn't quite figure it out. And in hindsight now I can see it's because Miss Independent was the main character during that season of my life. And so a lot of things that now I can see, oh yeah, that was off, or that wasn't exactly what I needed or wanted in a relationship. At the time it was like, well, I can do that myself, or it's okay if it feels more like roommates. Like it's good to be independent, right? That was the lens through which I was seeing that relationship, and kind of blinded me to some of the other needs that I had as well, that I now with my fiance, and I've been introduced to a whole world of social and connection and true partnership that just feels right. It's just that known piece, right? That when Miss Independent was the main persona I was viewing things from, it just wasn't even a thought, because that wasn't part of my survival kind of outline that I had created for myself, until I was able to work through that and at least see, and that's really the point of today, see the persona that we're seeing the world and making decisions from, and then giving yourself that choice. So again, not right, wrong, good or bad. It helped me survive. I still use Miss Independent for sure, speaking on stage alone. And for you all, whatever personas you have, just getting curious of, and we'll do this in real time today too, is this serving me in this season? How did this develop? Why is this here for me? And then helping yourself to make some choices around whether we drop the persona, elect, promote the persona, or just see it as a neutral, because it can be that as well. Okay, I promise I will give you the solution to that riddle. Is anyone still like, I haven't heard a word you said, Marin, because I am thinking about how to get that goose out of the bottle. But one more piece of the why and how powerful these personas are that ties into the solution of the riddle. In my experience as a coach, this is why I started today's conversation by saying this is one of my favorite topics, is because personas or characters, or getting to know ourselves and where we're acting from, is one of the most powerful ways, and in my experience, one of the quickest ways to change our reality, quite literally. Because it really influences that train of thought of whether things are going easily and swiftly, and I'm being the person that feels like it's really who I am, or I'm making things, or subconsciously making things really difficult. It's really tense. My relationships aren't thriving because of this other persona, or again, maybe a neutral persona, but recognizing that they have that much influence. So bringing that back to the goose in the bottle, and actually let's pass around the mic a little bit. I don't know where that ended up. Okay, perfect. Does anyone have a solution for how to get the goose out of the bottle without breaking the bottle or hurting the goose?
I'd find the guy that put the goose in the bottle and have him get it out.
That's actually kind of close. We'll come back to that. What's your name? Mark. Okay, we'll come back to that, Mark. Anyone else have a solution?
I know better. Don't put the goose in the first place.
Don't put the goose in the bottle in the first place. Uh-huh.
Did you have something?
Take the cap off. Take the lid off.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for participating and thinking through this goose in the bottle. I actually love these responses with this group. And of course, this shouldn't surprise me because of the community that we're in, of being open-minded and reflective. When I first heard this riddle many years ago, I struggled. I was like, do you heat up the bottle? Like, how does that work? Can you like freeze it? And then, or like, I don't know, is the goose like malleable in some way? How do you get it out? Can you like screw off part of that gooseneck bottle so that it's just the wide part? I really struggled to find this answer. And then I heard the solution days later. The solution is actually quite similar to some of the responses we got today. There is no bottle, there is no goose, so we don't have to get the goose out of the bottle. You guys are onto it. Now, when I heard that solution, I was like, what are you talking about? You gave me this riddle. There's a goose in the bottle. You put the goose in there's a goose in the bottle. You told me there was a goose in the bottle. Saying that there's not a bottle and there's not a goose is not a solution. I was pretty irate. I was like, I just spent days like taking notes, trying to learn physics, and you're just telling me that it doesn't exist. I share this riddle and I share this example today talking about personas because my response and some of your responses, all of your responses, gives us an insight into some of the personas that we take into how we relate with the world, how we solve problems. So for me at that time, that frustrated person, that persona I had on was a persona that is very proud of being a good problem solver, kind of like Miss Independent, I can figure it out. And also a persona that really thought there was right and wrong, that it was black and white, there's always an answer, a solution. That's why I like math and numbers. And so hearing this solution that in my mind, through the lens of those personas, didn't make sense, had me feel in a whole bunch of ways. And for you, I'm, again, really fascinated to hear the answers that are coming from the audience today of, well, maybe just talk to the person who put the goose in there and say, you get it out, which is essentially the solution. Or don't put it in the first place. Again, essentially the solution. How interesting to think about what personas guide those kind of answers, and to think that those were some of the first answers that came to mind for you. If you were like me and you are still kind of feeling a way about like, Marin, that was not even a riddle. I see some nods in the audience. That's okay too. And then how interesting, again, not right, wrong, good or bad, to know what personas are kind of leading the way today. But to think, yeah, what persona is fired up, or am I seeing this riddle, or maybe my life as a whole, that's causing me to respond in that way, or to find different solutions than today's solution to that riddle. So that concludes the first part of today. And now I'm going to go into some practices that help us really identify some personas, and have some practices that you can drop and elect and promote and play with what personas we have on our table and lenses we put on through our life. In my introduction, you heard I'm a financial coach. I really focus on helping individuals with their money. And I'll talk about that just for a bit, because I'm going to introduce these practices through the lens of finances, and that might feel like it's out of left field or irrelevant. I want to explain where I'm coming from and why I see it as totally congruent. So first, some context. I actually started my education journey as a dance major. I see this kind of as dancing, this performative persona in me still gets to thrive on stages like this. I then went to psychology when I decided dance would be my side passion, my hobby that I still do to this day. But psychology, those classes really fascinated me. And when I was graduating from St. Thomas with that psychology degree, I had studied abroad for one program in Denmark and took a positive psychology course, which was fascinating to take positive psych in Denmark, because Denmark has been called the happiest country in the world. And so I was so fascinated to learn, well, positive psych in Denmark, I'm going to get like the best of the the best of the best there. And in some ways I really did, and in other ways it flipped my perception of positive psych and happiness on its head. Because what I found in Denmark, and we had this one activity where we actually got to go around part of the city center and talk to individuals who lived in Denmark and say, why do you think this is the happiest country in the world? And the answers I got were very chill, similar to some of the personas that came out with that riddle today. And mainly it was, I don't know, we're pretty content. That was the response and the feeling that I got from the country as a whole. And really, when we think about positive psych, and the more I learned about positive psych, it's the study of wellness. And some of the founders of positive psych, one of which I had the honor of studying under, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, if you've read the book Flow, some of them have even admitted to wishing the name was a little bit different, because positive psych and happiness, we automatically link to this outward expression of happiness and elation, a very Americanized way in some sense of like joy and what that looks like. When actually the study of wellness and positive psych is how do we experience life as a whole, which means the hard emotions, the hard times, and yes, the joyful elation times. And relating with all of those things and finding practices to help us thrive through life as a whole, that's what positive psych is all about. So again, in Denmark, that's what I found too. It was how do we relate with life as a whole and feel more of that contentedness rather than elation and joy all the time, which I admit is kind of what I expected Denmark to be like as the happiest country in the world. I went on to actually pursue a PhD in positive psych at Claremont Graduate University, and then quickly learned that although I loved the research and find so much of it really fascinating, More so, I liked applying these practices. And I was earning my life coach certification at the time too, so I thought, if I can take the research side of positive psych and apply it to coaching, and then help individuals to ask some of these questions and implement some of these practices so that they can create fulfilling and meaningful lives for themselves, how awesome would that be? And I started on that track. I niched down a little bit, because really what I was doing is helping individuals, and mostly women, to make decisions that helped them to create fulfilling and meaningful lives. So that's where I hung out for a little bit. That's what my first book is about making authentic decisions. What does that look like? Caricature work, parts work, personas is definitely interwoven into some of the practices I share in that book and the experiences that I had with my clients the first few years of my practice. And as we went, even though we were my clients were so passionate and I was so passionate about fulfilling and meaning and how great to be content with life, even the hard times, how can we be present with that? And that's beautiful work. There tended to be this thing under the surface that would come up, if not in direct ways, in these subcurrent ways. And that was the topic of money. Because even once we got clear on, you know what, I do want to move to a different country, that's always been my thing, or, this relationship really isn't feeling fulfilling and good for me, how I'm going to take steps to leave this and to make some changes, or, wow, I really want to start this business, and that's really where I can tell that I'm going to thrive, no matter what it brings. There was always that next question, again, asked directly or indirectly, but how will I fund it? Or what does that mean for my financial security, which is a big part of wellness and your ability to flourish and thrive? And so I saw this as a kind of a gap that financial conversations and conversations around coaching and fulfillment and meaning kind of lived in different places, and there wasn't much crossover, and I saw the need for that crossover. So that's why I went back and got my budget coaching certification as well. And now most of my clients start with conversations pretty explicitly on money. We literally outline their joyful budget and bring in these value conversations, these interests, these personas, characters, into what would it look like if it was really aligned with what feels best for you. However, and I share all of that context, ultimately what's happening, even when we're talking directly about numbers and the money in your bank account or on your credit card, rarely ever are we actually talking about money in those conversations. It's just that money is this shortcut, for better or for harder sometimes, to unearth things like the personas we bring into this world. And not only is it this shortcut, because there's so much emotion that can be held there for so many of us with money, questions of worthiness, our upbringing, the rules we've been told or adopted, the lens, again, through which we see this world. But also, the outcome, the result, is a really tangible thing. And so there's this great playground that I've absolutely loved leaning into the more and more that I've supported people specifically with conversations and coaching on money. And so I share all of that context because we're going to go into today to finding some personas that we are all carrying through the lens of money, and planting a little seed that maybe this isn't so much about money, or maybe it's we're using money as this gateway, but potentially how we do anything is how we do everything. And so it's just this quick way to get to what are the personas that influence my life, and then being able to play with those personas in an area of life that can create really tangible results for us. So with that, 3 different personas that I'm going to help us find today. One is one that's a little bit lower energy, fear, scarcity, some of those personas that might be evident in our lives. I'll bring us back up. One is going to be that excited, elation, kind of flowing persona. And then one's going to be more neutral, which is kind of my favorite. So let's start with the fear, scarcity, and I promise I'll bring us out of here. But this gives us some insight into some of the ways that oftentimes when we are scared or we're in a stressful scenario, what persona comes to light there. So I want you to think in your mind of a time when, again, we're using the lens of money, when there was something financially or financially related in your life that felt really scary. And how did you act during that time? And then using the lens of persona, what persona felt evident now that you're thinking of it through this lens during that season. So I'll give an example as a story and then give you a minute to reflect on your own. One that comes to mind when I ask myself this question is a conversation when I was 18 years old with my dad. And I was 18, newly out of the house, on my own, actually, Miss Independent, for the first time. And felt a lot of scarcity around money. And how do I know that I'm safe? And how do I make this work? Is this one job enough to hold as I'm getting my education? What does that look like? And I distinctly remember at the time, I was 18, I had $13,000 to my name, which for an 18-year-old is good, right? But at the time, and that is because my parents were so supportive. So not only that, but I also knew if I needed to fall back, I could fall back on something. And what a gift that was. And yet, that scarcity fear, am I doing it the right way? What happens if this all disappears? That was so evident. So I had this conversation with my dad. I called him, and I'm sure he said so many things during that conversation. But in part because I was already entering that conversation from a place of scarcity and fear, what I heard and took away from that conversation was something he said, that $13,000 can disappear really quickly. That can go away really fast. And again, I don't blame him for this. And now that I'm well into my adulthood, that makes sense. Yep, that's a new roof. But also, that was the one thing I gleaned and then held on to and really kind of amplified that persona of scarcity and fear in my life. And what this looks like played out is a few years later in grad school, another phone call, this time me talking to a friend. We were kind of at a point of contention, and that's because this friend, the generous, community-oriented friend that he was, saw that our friend group in grad school was really, really stressed and decided to do something about it. So he put together a party for that weekend. He had a theme. He got decorations and food, and he asked all of our friends, would you mind contributing $7 because I put together this thing for our friends? And I was on the phone with that friend saying, absolutely not. I didn't plan that party. That's $7 that I feel like I didn't decide to spend. And in hindsight, as I tell this story, that sounds ridiculous, $7, and I was so grippy about it. But it's because that persona of scarcity, $13,000 can go away so fast that I was gripping everything and I was making decisions and acting from that place. So again, circling back to the power of personas, when that's the driver of your life, how does that influence your life? And as best as possible, letting go of any judgment or, again, right, wrong, good, or bad, but just saying, yeah, I see how that line connects. And I see and felt at that time, although I couldn't identify it quite yet, it didn't feel like me either. It just felt scared and grippy. So I'll give you a minute here. Think of a time, and again, using the lens of money, when you felt scarcity or fear, and then ask yourself, what persona did that either develop or was at play there? And as we find these three personas today, it can be helpful because the point of this, at least as I guide my clients in this practice, is to build relationships with these parts of ourself. So I like to give them names. And again, back to the idea of caricatures, even like exaggerate their personality. Has anyone seen Inside Out? All those little characters. I actually have a client who has those characters on her desk. And so as she's going throughout her day, she'll like push forward the one that's most active and be like, that fire girl, she is. She was angry today, she's here in full force. And so identifying your own persona that you just found and the next two that we'll go into, potentially with a name. It could be as simple as, using my story as an example, $7 Marin. Or whatever name lands with you. Sometimes my clients like to use movie characters or Inside Out characters. So hold that persona, we found it, we're gonna put it aside for a second and go into the second persona with a little bit different energy. So this excitement flow persona. And as I was prepping for today too, I thought, I wonder if that excitement flow energy, is that a persona or is that when all the personas fall away? with April's theme of dropping the persona. And I'll let you guys choose what resonates more or less with you. But similar to what we just did with fear and scarcity, think of a time in your life where you felt in flow with finances, with your resources, with your decisions, when you felt excited, things just kind of fell into place. And another story to lock this in, to give an example, and then I'll let you think. Actually, two. One is with a client who early last year messaged me, and we had a consult together. I love those first conversations with anyone of just getting to know you. Is this what I offer? Is this right for you? What do you need? What are you dreaming about? And after our conversation, she said, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. This is the assurance I've been looking for. This is the structure I've been looking for with that mindset layer. She was so excited. And she said, but that one-on-one coach investment is something I've never done before, and I don't know, at this moment I can't make that happen, but I'm going to, because I know this is aligned for me. And 2 months later, I got the most excited email. Marin, I reached out to my resources, I took a look at what I had available for me, I saved, I made it work, I'm ready, I'm so ready to make this happen. Similarly, on a more personal, less business example, my fiance and I were recently touring wedding venues, and we found this venue that is just stunning. And when we were standing in there, we're like, this is it. This is where we can see our community coming together. It feels homey. It feels like this place. We can really be present in this celebration. We didn't quite feel that same way when we looked at the price of the venue. But it still had that excitement of this, like, this is it, though. Like, how do we make this work? And so we were talking to the venue coordinator, and we were thinking of winter anyway, and we were flexible with days. And she's like, well, if you're thinking of winter and a Friday, we have this one Friday in February for a promotional something they had going on. That's $15,000 less than what this venue typically is. $15,000. I mean, 15000. And we're like, yeah, yes, exactly. And things just felt like they were falling into place. And I give both of those examples because I think they're both great representations of when you're in this place of having that much clarity, or even using the word certainty, like this is it, it's right. Even when some of the logistics don't seem to line up right away, staying in that energy, staying in that persona, what happens on the other side? You find $15,000, or that drops away, which seems impossible on the forefront of that exercise. Or you make it work, you like pull together your resources in a way that feels really good. So again, take a moment right now, think in your own life, when's a time that you felt aligned, in flow, excited? Maybe that's currently, and you're so excited for the other side when things fall into place, but you don't know how they will yet, but they will. And just like that first persona, let's give it a name. So maybe it's Venue Marin or Jelly Bean. I don't know, something that feels like it connects to that feeling for you. And then we'll come back to that persona in a second. We have one more to explore. I mentioned earlier, this might be my favorite way of discovering personas and caricatures. I want you to look around this room and see something that stands out to you. Could be literally anything. What might that thing tell you about your relationship with money? Which is also your relationship potentially with life, if that expands beyond that one topic area. So as an example, for me, what just stood out was this speaker. And if I were to imagine what this speaker might tell me about my relationship with money, it's to listen. Listen a little more. Take a step back. Hear how things are feeling. Trust what you hear. What stood out for you, and what comes to mind? I'll give you a second. what I love about this exercise is we're often such thinkers that it gets us out of our head a little bit. And maybe it feels like the speaker is telling me some aspect about myself, but that came from within me. So whatever you just thought came from within you, which means it's a persona that lives in you somewhere. You just needed something else to help you access it. And again, give it a name. Maybe speaker is the obvious name for me. And oftentimes when I do this work in client sections, these are the personas that really land. I can still remember there was a client I was on, I take phone calls oftentimes, and she was telling me that there were these brown boots in her closet, and she's like, I love these boots, I've never worn them though. And there was this deep understanding that she had been walking through life waiting for. I think a lot of us tend to do this, like the special moments to really enjoy and celebrate, or spend money, like just save until there's gonna be something different, something special happening. And she's like, I'm gonna wear the brown boots today. So letting this be a way, if you're ever feeling stuck you can do this on the day-to-day of like, okay, let me look around the room. This piano is speaking to me, what might it say? And it just brings out these words of wisdom that you didn't even know were inside of you, but were inside of you all along. Okay, before we go on to dropping and potentially electing personas, I'd love to turn the mic on one more time to see, does anyone want to share any of those personas that you found, or an experience that you had with the personas?
I was looking at that painting of Jesus there with the collars and the background and so on. And one of the things that I like to do in life is go to exotic places, and I try to find the most exotic and kind people. Well, it kind of works right into that. The beauty, the color, the art, which is there. So I'm thinking, yeah, that's my persona. I expect to see beauty and art and exotic people, and I do meet them.
Yeah.
So there.
Amazing, amazing.
I'm going to continue with the theme about Jesus and money. When Jesus was in the temple, he took a whip and drove the money changers out of the temple. So you can imagine what his attitude was. Also, when they tried to trick Jesus and they were asking him questions about who should give money to who, he told them to take a coin and look at the picture, who's on the coin. And they said, well, Caesar's on the coin. And then he followed up with, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, etc.
Interesting. See how money is just interwoven, like all the way back. One of my favorite books on money is The Richest Man in Babylon. Has anyone read it? It really takes the concept of money and brings it, this is a little tangential, I will admit, but it brings it back to all the way back when it was like, I'll give you my camel so that you can make it across the desert and get the resource and come back. And then all the way back then, it was still tracking, like, I've loaned you a camel, and in return, this is what will be exchanged. And there's something about that book and how it brings it back to, or those stories that was just shared of like, yeah, money has become such this topic, and again, this like energy-filled piece in our life. When we bring it back to what it actually is, one of my favorite definitions is another form of energy exchange. How do we think of it differently, or maybe even not differently, but just have a different perspective, especially if we're struggling with it or with an aspect of it? So thank you guys for sharing these different personas. It's time to drop some, the whole theme of April. So maybe this is obvious for you because I did preface with that scarcity, fear, persona, excitement, and neutral. And often that scarcity, fear one is the one that doesn't feel the best. But it can be any of these. And what I want to encourage today with dropping the persona, back to my roots of positive psych and how powerful my master's thesis was self-compassion, how powerful self-compassion is, that it actually, even though sometimes we're taught differently, when we practice self-compassion, we achieve our goals faster, we relate with ourselves better, we have, again, that flourishing and meaningful life as opposed to the self-criticism kind of, you have to do this and I'm not good at managing my time and some of those things that can come up. So practicing self-compassion, even when dropping personas. So my original life coach mentor, she's also the one who introduced the goose in the bottle metaphor, Kobe Kozlowski. She gave this wonderful imagery when it came to characters, personas in our life of a bus. And imagining that these personas or characters that we might want to drop, instead of kicking them off the bus and creating this tension point with them, can we actually have them be welcome participants? Because chances are, back to what we talked about the first half of today, if they developed for a means of survival or they're rooted within our life, chances are they're pretty intertwined with who we are. So instead of trying to get rid of them completely, can we befriend them in a way while still drawing healthy boundaries? So she gave this example of if all of our personas are on a bus, and the ones that we don't want to be driving the bus, can we give them a graham cracker or a coloring book and send them to the back of the bus? Sometimes with my clients, we quite literally have these personas like, you know what, you're so caught up in problem solving this money situation in your life, but you're a problem solver. That's kind of what you are at the root. You want to keep us safe. So what's another area of life? Can you just make sure that we have food this week? Like, let's plan the grocery list. And just giving that persona something else to focus on can be helpful as well, or another way to navigate it. And drop that persona without creating a lot of tension and friction. So think of the personas we met today. You have 3 top of mind. Maybe some others have even come to mind as you've heard various stories today. And imagine what it would be like, this is out there, but you guys are open to it, I know, to have an imaginary conversation with this persona, give it a graham cracker, a coloring book, some sort of activity, and say, thanks for driving the bus and getting us to this point. Someone else is gonna jump in. You can go rest, or you can go munch on this graham cracker. And still be here, you're welcome here, but you're not the driver anymore. So imagine what that might feel like. What would you say to the persona? What persona are you choosing to drop in the first place? And I see some facial expressions that maybe some of you are having these full conversations and are really, I think, great exercise to take this even a step further. If you like journaling, or some of my clients have even done like almost a mini acting session within themselves in their own safe home by themselves. Seems crazy at first, but the things that come up are so fascinating, is actually going back and forth between these personas. So if you have one you're trying to drop, and then one you might elect in a little bit here, or maybe like, I've had some clients explain it as the person who leads the conference table of personas, the leader there, and have a conversation back and forth. So like, hey, I'd love to send you to the back of the bus, and then what would that persona actually respond with? Of like, no, because we're not going to be safe if I go to the back of the bus. And actually going back and forth and being like, actually, we have this new employee who's coming in and they're great. And what would that actually sound like? And the things that come up are really interesting to play with. So you can take that with you today and go a little further if you'd like. But one last activity, now that we've dropped a persona, or you're thinking in the process of dropping a persona, we need a driver to the bus. So if that was the driver to the bus, or one of the main drivers, who would you elect as the driver, as the lead persona for your life? And if only for today, maybe we just try it on as an experiment. So if I was like, I wonder, I don't think I've ever really let my playful, creative persona drive the bus. Like, they've been here, but what if they drove the bus? And knowing that the stakes are pretty low on this wonderful Sunday, what would it look like? What would my life look like if that persona drove the bus? And then similarly, a journal or in your mind conversation of, hey, like Miss Playful, you're elected. You get to drive today. What would that feel like? What would that sound like? And then again, making decisions through that lens as you go out today. And tying in the bit about money that we talked about earlier, also getting curious of how does this impact your life in real ways, financially, or in relationships, or in what you see, what you experience, the connections you make or don't make, the opportunities that become available, depending on the persona that you put on. So to summarize all of today. You guys took a whole persona ride with me. We started by talking about what a persona is, at least my perspective, with my biases of positive psych and coaching and financial coaching specifically. We talked about why those personas exist, potentially rooted all the way back to the basics of survival, and what personas you might have. First, that came to light with the goose in the bottle story, and then fear, excitement or flow, the speaker or your version of it, and then giving you these practices to drop personas, which maybe look different than what we thought about dropping at the beginning of today. It's not actually a full boot out, but what does it feel like to actually just de-escalate how powerful that persona is in our life, and then also promoting a persona. So the summary of all of that, I think, is of choice. How can we remind ourselves where we have choice in how we see the world, and then how does taking our power back of that choice, the personas we wear or we choose or we drop, how does that then impact our life as a whole? That's all from me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey. So we're at the part of our day where John's going to choose, or maybe somebody could just volunteer to help John pass the basket. Oh, you lost out. Somebody jumped up faster. Okay, so Lake Harriet Spiritual Community relies on all of your amazing donations to keep wonderful speakers coming, to keep the doors open. So definitely give what you can today, and we really appreciate that.
I should have danced more. Left those things on the shelves at the store. I should have danced more.
I was thinking that.
Spun around like a matador. I should have danced more. What on earth is this body for? I should have danced more. Giving myself to this beat I adore. I should have laughed. I should have laughed between the tears that fell on the floor. I should have flown, I should have flown, I should have danced more. I should have danced more. Trying to even the score. I should have loved more. Shown you what was at the core. I should have loved more. Kept every oath I swore. I should have loved more. It was worth all the pain that I bore. I should have laughed. I should have laughed.
So as is our tradition, if you could help me bless this beautiful green in all of your wonderful giving. We're going to put our hands up here and repeat after me. God's perfect love.
God's perfect love.
Flowing through me.
Flowing through me.
Blesses and multiplies.
Blessed and multiplies.
All that I give.
All that I give.
All that I receive.
All that I receive.
And all that I am. Thank you. So we're going to, again, as is our tradition, we're going to make a small circle here. And our lovely speaker is going to send us out the door with a few words. So, join hands. All the way around. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Go through there. Yeah.
Well, it was such an honor to be here with you guys today, and I look forward to connecting with many of you after as well. What I leave you with is to think about the different vibrations, energies, thoughts that you had as you were reflecting with your personas, and again, back to that notion of choice, and maybe even play. How might you play with this concept throughout today? So what do you choose to try on as your persona of the day? And then getting curious and maybe reporting back to each other. How did that influence your life? What was that like? What new experiences